data webinar that To Be Real is holding, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome some of my colleagues as well from across the To Be Real consortium. A quick reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so to make sure that if you don't want to be recorded, to have your camera and mic turned off. If at any point you want to ask questions, please just pop them in the chat function, and we'll get to a question and answer session at the end of the presentations. We have a fairly packed agenda. We've got 4 presentations around the economy, but we also have one of our coordinators present as well to tell us all a little bit more about To Be Real, whilst we wait for other people to join finally into the meeting. So before we get into the detail around the circular bioeconomy, the rules of the game, which is a very dynamic title for this stage of the week and this early in the morning for me anyway, I'd just like to hand over to Maria Jimenez, who is from Pino, Spain, who will just tell us a little bit about the To Be Real programme before we get into the main meat of the meeting. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you very much. So I guess that I could start my presentation mode. Just let me, okay. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes.
It's okay? Okay, so thank you very much. As said from Gail, this is Maria Jimenez. I'm part of P&O Innovation as the To Be Real coordinator. This presentation is normally made by my colleague Lara Valentin, who today cannot join this webinar, but I will try to do my best presenting To Be Real project. The content of my presentation will be very short. I will present To Be Real at a glance, our services and their values in the To Be Real coins. Also, a bit slices about how to apply the evaluation criterion scoring system, and also the next events and the To Be Real community platform. So, To Be Real, as said, the main goal of To Be Real is to catalyze public and public-private bioeconomy projects at different stages of maturity, leading to a higher number of flagship projects across Europe. This project was granted from a topic from 2024, the CBO01, and it was started in November 2024. It is supposed to last over 5 years until 2029, supporting or being supported, by 30 partners from 10 European countries. You can have here some information regarding the website and LinkedIn. So if you have the chance to follow us, it would be very appreciated. Regarding the consortium and the partners, we have to say that those partners are which added the complementarities and the value to the project. Thanks to the consortium, we have a great regional research and stakeholder engagement. Thank you for the clusters that support and mobilize the local ecosystems, SMEs, and public actors under all the underdeveloped bioeconomy regions. Also, we have on board RTOs and pilot partners, which provides the technology validation and pilot capacity for this project. And besides this, we also have specialists covering promoting ideas to investable, compliant, and exploitation-ready cases, supporting the market, funding, and policy regulatory acceleration. Those partners complement across 4 service verticals, one from technical, other from business and financial, other from regulatory and legal, and the social innovation that will be, I will explain later on in further slides. So this is the To Be Real at a glance to explain what are our main activities and what we are doing in To Be Real. So first of all, we have identified the key barriers limiting scalability of bioproject related with bioeconomy. We also provide tailored services across 4 verticals of the readiness level to bioeconomy stakeholders. And we organize, of course, events like this webinar with the bioeconomy stakeholders through workshops, BioBeats forum, and other activities. Our main objective is to boost widening countries to strengthen their position in the bioeconomy. Also, we are supposed and we will provide long-term assistance to boost the bioeconomy projects towards a flagship status during the next 4 years now. So, how we can do this? As said, we have this BioPitch forum, for instance, that will be held in December 2026. We will also share some information regarding the registration and how to have more information regarding this activity. But for instance, this BioBeach forum will be the main event in the tutorial where will be selected projects to foster the matchmaking, to foster idea generation, and to engage the potential feedstock providers, technology providers, and investors. I will go through our services and how these services are translated into the values of the 2B coins. So firstly, we have a service related with the technology readiness level. In this service, we assess maturity of our technology and enables consistent comparison across technology types. Also, we have the regulatory readiness level, that maps where an innovation stands in its regulatory pathway and which compliance steps and are needed to advance development and the risk deployment. And we also have services around the business readiness level, which frames the business dimension needed to move an idea from the laboratory to a commercial success. Of course, the fourth vertical would be the social readiness level. It explores the society readiness to adopt and use an innovation, but engaging stakeholders around needs, interests, barriers, and acceptable solutions. So those four readiness levels are taken to have these application forms. So I will go. We are evaluating these four dimensions to have the tailored services, and regarding this or considering these application forms, we made an evaluation, and then if the project is selected, we go through the service development. You have all this information regarding the evaluation and the applications in our website. So in case you need further assistance or information regarding how to apply to this project, you will find here the information in the website. I will go also through the services portfolio by readiness level. You will find here the portfolio of the services that we provide thanks to our partners. Firstly, you will find the technical assistance, as said, based on the technology readiness level. In those services, you will find a little number here, 40, 20, 30. Those are the to be real coins that we have for these services. In total, for each applicant or for each project that will be supported by to be real, you could select 60 to be coins available for applicant. So in this catalog of services, you could select 60 to be coins and receive the assistance from the partners. I will not go deeply into the catalog of services. This PowerPoint will be available also for you, but this information is also available in our website. So in case you go through the website, you can also have detailed description about each of the services, from basic techno-economic assessment through bioeconomy policies and opportunities, or regarding the business and financial assistance, we can develop business models and plan creation or improvement, go-to-market and exploitation strategy. And least but not less, social innovation assistance around the stakeholder mapping or brand perception and trust evaluation, choice experiments. You will find a broad catalog of services that I'm sure you will find very useful for your projects. This is a brief explanation about how to apply and how the evaluation criterion and scoring system is. So you will find in our website, as said, the guidelines. You will have here a link on the application, online application, where you can download all the documents to prepare it in advance. So please first be sure that your idea fits in the real definition of the bioeconomic project and has a flagship potential. Then you can find the services on which you can select those who are more interested for your project. Supporting this package is in up to 62 Bitcoins. Then you will be able to prepare forms, downloading the guidance. You can draft your application and go through the questionnaire and the readiness levels forms offline if useful. Then and finally, you can submit online your application. You can click apply in the website and then complete the 5-step form. If you have already prepared these forms, it will be very useful. You can just copy and paste your submission, and then you will generate the submission and also a confirmation message. You will find that, as said, the guidelines here, the initial questionnaire also, and the readiness forms to prepare in advance your application. So what happens once we have received your application? We go through a evaluation criteria and scoring where some of our partners act as evaluators, and also we have a rapporteur. We have to make a decision within a maximum of 2 months. And we will evaluate the scoring, or we will evaluate your project regarding a different scoring around the 4 verticals: the technology readiness, the business readiness, and regulatory and readiness and social readiness. It is important to mention that this is not a score regarding the quality or the advancement of those 4 verticals, but it is the evaluation regarding the likelihood to become a flagship project within 5 years. So even if some of these 4 verticals are not completely displayed or completely developed by your project, we will score what is the likelihood of your project. We will have then a total score among 4 to 12 points. So we will have priority considerations starting at 9, and the projects from communities or regions which underdeveloped bioeconomy projects received 1 point plus. So I will not go into the internal organization of this evaluation, but we have a procedure around to be real partners to have these consensus, to have the results, to share what are our feels and thoughts regarding the projects. And if selected, the mentor will inform you about the selection of your project, and we will start the services within 3 months after the agreement. I will also remind you that what are the next events that we have in place. This is our most important event from the starting of this project. This is the BioPitch Forum. It will be held in the next November to 30th of November to the 2nd of December in Belgium. It will be a two-real satellite event at the Pitch Perfect. This is an important event that is organized from previous years, but this year two-real will be also supporting this event. To Be Real satellite event will be also published in our website and also in our community platform. And this is the opportunity to foster the matchmaking and collaboration, and also to engage with potential providers. The registration is now open. You can find more details regarding the registration in the website in pitchperfectbioeconomy.eu. But also we will publish it along our LinkedIn website and other communities to keep you updated regarding this event. I think that are now available some reduced fees for this event, so take it in advance and register it as soon as possible. Also, I would like to encourage you to join our To Be Real community platform. Then you will gather some available information that it is already published there. We have also 20 reports available for the community members, and we will be also supporting some opportunities like connecting with professionals and other researchers from the bioeconomy sector. We will exchange ideas about different knowledges and sections. And also, it is important to stay tuned about the upcoming activities and events that will be promoted through To Be Real platform. I would like just to comment that this is our team involved from the project coordination team. Lara Valentina said this is the main coordinator, Fran Julia in charge of the financial, and myself in the technical coordinator team. And this is all from my side. I hope I took only 10 minutes.
Thanks, Maria, for giving us a quick introduction into the To Be Real programme and setting the scene for where this webinar stands.
Thank you.
Just share my screen now too. So we'll move into the main agenda of the circular economy, circular bioeconomy in Europe, the rules of the game. So hopefully you can all see my screen okay. Somebody please say yes.
Yes.
Brilliant. I'll just give a very brief introduction into regulations and why they matter, why it is that regulations are so important towards new innovation and in supporting the bioeconomy. My colleague Ilaria from FAB FVG in Italy will then take us on a whistle-stop tour of the bioeconomy strategy in Europe, which was re-released at the end of last year. We'll then delve into what this means for forestry and what happens when realities and ideologies intersect. And we are very proud to have Eva come and speak to us from Biofuel Region, also one of our partners based in Sweden. And she has a wealth of experience around the forestry sector. And then finally, Bart from ILVO in Belgium will talk to us about how agri-food and the bioeconomy to regulatory approval, particularly looking at how novel foods and how biotechnology innovations move through that regulatory space. Okay. Here we go. So the first presentation up will be mine. It will be quite short, but during it I'll point to some other resources and information that you'll find both within the webinar and later on as well from our community platform. So why are regs important? Regs are an important part of the innovation cycle, but they don't appear from nowhere. They're grounded in either national or international strategy and policy. And quite often those regulations and policies will influence directly down towards standards and certifications. So this is a very, very brief diagram showing how strategy, policy, regulation, standards and certifications all impact to support innovation towards that route of commercial reality. By considering regulations early and often within the innovation journey enables a resulting commercial decision to be made really early at an early stage and can direct people towards different end markets and different commercialization strategies. Regulations can take quite a long time to address, so having an early insight about what your idea or innovation might need means that you can address those early and start creating revenue or start approaching investors at a commensurately appropriate stage. So right at the top, you've got strategy. This is a high-level vision of where a country or a bloc might wish to move. So thinking within the context of this presentation, the work that Ilaria will present gives you that kind of high-level innovation about where things sit. These then move through towards policy, which translates the vision, and Eva will be talking a little bit about how that intersects with national policy. And then you start getting into regulations. Now, these are enforceable laws that ensure compliance, and as such are things like directives, mandates, and quite often these are implemented at an EU level and then translated into national regulations and policy as well. And that's when industry starts really playing into the interaction with the process. But by having an understanding of the strategy and policy, you can anticipate what might be coming down the line and what the intention behind the regulation is as well. These then move on towards standards and certifications, and these are activities that an industry partner can engage with to prove that they are showing compliance with the regulation, and it gives the end user and other businesses, other consumers, as well as the public, confidence in the claims that you're making, that when you say something does X, Y, and Z, it actually does do X, Y, and Z, and you've got a certification and proof that that's exactly what will happen. So this is where regulations, strategy and policy sit. They don't come out of nowhere, and they do have a real impact on projects going forward. So I just touched into all these aspects. So they set the rules, they protect sustainability, so protect against deforestation and make sure that our biodiversity and natural environment stays intact and something that we wish to protect moving forward into the future, particularly with most countries' net zero ambitions. It creates market confidence as well, so it gives business clear rules for engagement and for scaling up their products and processes. But it also helps manage those trade-offs. As I've mentioned, you might need to make a decision quite early on in the piece about which sort of regulatory environment you want to engage with. And so it can help balance competing demands, not just for you, but for people who are supplying feedstock and also for people who are scaling up. Supporting safety and quality standards, but also builds fair competition and conditions so people can grow across borders instead of facing fragmented rules across different nationalities. Without regulation, the bioeconomy could become fragmented, environmentally damaged, or dominated by very short-term market pressures. But with engaging with regulation, it can shift towards resource efficiency, lower emissions, and strong supply chains, while still encouraging and supporting the innovation and investment that we need. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce this table. This is something that one of my colleagues put together as part of the work that we've done under To Be Real. And it shows where the various action plans, strategies and policies sit across Europe. In 2011, the EU declared that it wanted to become a low-carbon competitive economy by 2050 and set a roadmap to achieve this. As part of that, they wanted to achieve 80 to 95% greenhouse gas reduction. But in 2019, they took this a bit further to aim for carbon neutrality by 2050 and published its European Green Deal. So if you can look at just up towards the top left-hand quadrant, you can see the European Green Deal sits there right in the middle of our sustainability and bioeconomy and policy actions. Excuse me. And originating out of that, there are three very clear policies that have been built around the European Green Deal. We've got the Farm to Fork strategy, EU biodiversity strategy, and Fit for 55. Then you've got various others which have a strong influence. It has a strong influence on which are dotted lines, and other aspects as well, which, so for instance, the European Bioeconomy strategy and the Chemical strategy for sustainability, where the European Green Deal has a very, very strong influence. I'm just going to dig a bit more into the European Green Deal. Oops. Just very, very quickly. So as I mentioned, the aim is to reach climate neutrality by 2050, and main activity that will support this is to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, and that's compared with 1990 levels. And through this, they're going to build more resource efficient and make sure as well, so building into that societal pillar that we talked about within To Be Real as well, make sure that nobody is left behind and that it's a fair and equitable share of that kind of activity. So it plays into four particularly policy scans. At the bottom, you have got them listed: climate and energy, industry and economy, mobility, and agriculture and biodiversity. So through climate and energy, looking at accelerating the shift towards renewable energy and improving energy efficiency. Industry and economy, again, sort of looking towards a circular economy focused on sustainable products, reducing any sort of waste or unrealised valorisation, and modernising manufacture to take into account the bioeconomy. Mobility, which is related around transport, and of course agriculture biodiversity, which is related as well about the farm to fork strategy, which I mentioned just now. So the Green Deal turns those kind of broad climate goals and those broad ambitions within the strategy into binding targets across the various sectors. Okay. It also leans, probably really good point to point out at this point, that it leans very heavily into Horizon Europe, so ensuring that there's funding to support these ambitions as well. So going back to that spreadsheet that I mentioned, the Green Deal isn't just one single aspect, it's a package of policies and funding. I've just mentioned about European funding. And it also includes other activities as well. So if you look at the Fit for 55, that's in itself is a set of proposals and guidelines to achieve that 55% reduction, and includes a lot of revision to various regulations, 8 in particular, across the EU, including the emissions trading schemes, land use change for forestry, which Eva will probably tap into, as well as introducing 4 new regulations. So having that one policy has led to a whole bunch of other activities as well, which are aimed at supporting the move towards a net zero activity. So flowing on from these, like moving across the right, there's a Green Deal Industrial Plan as well, Net Zero Industry Act. And right at the right-hand side, you'll see that the bioeconomy strategy sits heavily influenced by the Green Deal. So if you have time to read the Green Deal, it's not a trivial matter to read it and understand it. You can understand where the bioeconomy strategy has come from. It was first published in 2012, incorporates aspects, like I said, about the Green Deal, and Ilaria will talk to us a lot more about that in the next talk. But thinking about how the EU bioeconomy strategies flow through, and just recognising that European strategies get delivered at a local level, I think this is quite an interesting picture, just to show how other countries have taken up the challenge about having a bioeconomy strategy. Now, this was information that was collated in September 2025 through a project that we at Alder were involved in about bio-based regulatory networks within the UK, and we recognise that 12 countries across the EU already have dedicated bioeconomy strategies, which is the dark green. Looking at the light green, and 10 more countries have dedicated strategies under development, 8 countries have other incentives, and 12 have related strategies. So if you take into account all the broadly green-based countries, that a vast majority of the EU are engaging constructively and strongly with the bioeconomy strategy, and therefore it'll end up flowing through towards regulations and standards as well. Maria's already mentioned about our community platform. So the diagram that I showed earlier is available within all of our reports which we've published. So if you go onto the To Be Real website, you'll see the opportunity in the top right, I've ringed in red here, to sign up and join the community platform. You'll find that there are 4 regulatory reports which we have authored with all the input from the To Be Real partners. Covers 21 member states, and for ease of reference we've split them broadly into 4 zonal areas as dedicated on the left. The little diagram picture in the middle shows you which countries we've covered as well. Each country has a quick snapshot page showing where their vision and strategies might sit, and where the drive for that particular country might be, and that again plays into maybe decisions that people might wish to make about where to base their innovative activities. Okay, so just very quickly at the end, so the key points about why regulations matter for a thriving bioeconomy: it ensures true sustainability by playing into strategies, drivers, frameworks that already exist across the EU. Drives circular economy practices, creating reliable markets to boost competitiveness and foster investment security. Okay, and so just a quick snapshot at the end about myself and 2 of my colleagues, Taya and Andrew, worked heavily on this particular project. So I'll just stop sharing mine screen now, and hopefully I've set the scene for why the bioeconomy strategy matters, and I'll hand over now to Ilaria to take us a bit more in depth behind the new refreshed EU strategy.
Thank you, Gail, for this very insightful presentation. I'll try to share my slide, and please tell me if everything is fine. hope
Yep.
you can see
Yes.
the presentation.
Yes.
All good.
Thank you very much. Today I will try to dive into the new EU Bioeconomy strategy, which was delivered last November by the European Commission. And why is bioeconomy important for Europe? We have tried to make a summary of the main elements why bioeconomy is so important for our continent, since it is the highest growth sector in the European Union and it outperforms the broader economy. As you can see, there is a 2.7 trillion euros estimated value of the bioeconomy in the framework of the EU bioeconomy, with more than 70 million jobs created and 863 billion euros of added value by biomass, with a very interesting multiplier factor of 2.9 of indirect jobs created and quite a relevant business R&D expenditure generated by this sector. So this is why bioeconomy is so important for Europe and why Europe is dedicated so much interest and priority to this topic, also from the regulatory point of view. The policy development process did not start last year, but it has been a long way coming. If we think about the first bioeconomy strategy, which was delivered in 2012, so 14 years ago, and here you can see a summary of the pathway that led to the new bioeconomy strategy. Of course, the path doesn't end here because there are more regulations to come, in particular the EU Biotech Act and so on. But it is very important to highlight that in this framework, the EU bioeconomy strategy can be considered a real game changer, a turning point in the way that European Commission, European Union decided to deal with bioeconomy and bio-based industries. And this new framework, which was inaugurated by this strategy, shifts the focus towards the market, toward industrial development, and most of all, also the reinforcement, the strengthening of European value chains in terms also of strategic sovereignty, trying to push bioeconomy at the center of the European core industrial policy. Of course, the bioeconomy strategy is not a standalone regulation, and it is very much aligned with very important regulatory frameworks, which will shape the way Europe deals with competitiveness, but also sustainability and food and agriculture in the future. In particular, as you can see here, the competitiveness compass, and in particular, the strategy is aligned with the competitiveness compass in the sense that it supports strategic autonomy and supply chain resilience. It supports the substitution of fossil-based inputs and resources with sustainably sourced local biomass, and it promotes and boosts high-tech leadership of Europe, also with respect to other emerging and leading world global economies. The Clean Industrial Deal, of course, since the strategy is a catalyst for the decarbonization and the sustainability of the European industry. And lastly, but not as less important, the vision for food and agriculture, which tries to put farmers and foresters, so the primary sector, at the center of new bio-based value chains and very active players of a circular bioeconomy in Europe. What's new in a nutshell? If we have to highlight the main and pinpoint the main points which represent something new in this EU bioeconomy strategy with respect to the past, this can be a list of the main elements. This strategy is much closer to the market, so it has a less focus on basic research and a stronger focus on scaling up on industrial deployment and mobilization of investments. It supports, Europe decides to support the creation of lead markets both in terms of biomasses and resources as well as technological lead markets. there is a strong focus on investment mobilization, both by grants, but also new financing mechanism and attraction of private capitals to the risk investments, which is a very critical issue in this field. Bioeconomy has shifted towards the center of industrial policy at European level, with biotech and biomanufacturing as strategic assets of our industrial policy. Of course, the circular biomass use. Biomass which is sustainably sourced, but also used in a circular perspective, and supply chain security. So a way to reduce reliance on imports and supply European bio-based economy also with critical raw materials which are locally produced. What are the key imperatives of these new strategies? Scale up, build demand, secure supply, and partner globally. So scale up bio-based investments and projects, build demand for bio-based products, secure supply of sustainably sourced biomass, and partner globally. And these four imperatives translate into the four pillars, which are the backbone of this strategy. Pillar number one is scaling up innovation and investments. So transition from the lab to the market, to deployment. We can highlight some challenges in the framework of this pillar and how the EU Bioeconomy strategy identifies enablers that can support overcoming those challenges. First challenge is, of course, removing barrier, both regulatory and non-regulatory. And here is a summary of the main enablers which will promote overcoming this challenge. So the EU Biotech Acts, which are expected later on, which will, of course, support both with sectoral and horizontal measures and regulatory sandboxes, a simplification and the strengthening of biomanufacturing projects, the creation of a space for exchanging best practices, and which is the European Bioeconomy Regulators and Innovators Forum, providing guidance to companies on how to classify new bio-based products, and in order to simplify and to coordinate in a better way across agencies, one single online entry point so that companies only need to submit information once. And this is quite an important thing, as you know, in this field for bioeconomy-based projects. The Commission will also make technical support available to SMEs, promote the use of regulatory sandboxes in the bioeconomy so that there can be demonstration projects which are monitored by regulation administration that have a simplified framework. And then, of course, also the review of the product environmental footprint methods will contribute to removing regulatory barriers in this field. The second challenge is stimulating innovation and investments. As you know, for a company, when moving from research to market maturity, there are two valleys of death, which are very important bottlenecks to be overcome. The first valley of death is the transition from demonstration to commercialization. So where technologies need to prove that they are technically and economically viable. And the second valley of death is market entry to industrial scale. And what the Commission did and is going to do in the future, reinforced by the EU Bioeconomy strategy, is on one side to pool resources based on, as you can see, Scale Up Europe Fund, European Innovation Council measures, European Competitiveness Fund, but also in the CBE joint undertaking, the Common Agricultural Policy on one side, and on the other side, since de-risking capital is a very important issue in bio-based projects and investments, is to create this new Bioeconomy Investment Deployment Group, BIDG, which has been recently launched by the Commission this week, which will bring together the Commission, the European Investment Bank, and national banks and private investor to pull together capital to share the risk and crowd in capital for industrial scale deployment. Pillar 2 is developing lead markets for materials and technologies. First of all, there is the need to have an efficient use of biomass. And so this means directing biomass toward higher value applications, trying to have a balance among reducing pressures on ecosystems and having high value applications based on, with respect to what is currently done, while taking into consideration local peculiarities and also the trends of the market. And the sufficient use of biomass will be supported both by considering this issue in strategic plans of the Common Agricultural Policy and national energy and climate plans, cohesion policy, and also, not less important, national and regional bioeconomy strategies. The second challenge is creating lead markets for material, and in this field, the Commission identified 5 lead markets, which are particularly important and strategic for Europe, which are bio-based plastics and polymers, textiles from bio-based fibers and fabrics, bio-based chemicals derived from renewable biological resources, bio-based construction products, and bio-based fertilizers and plant protection products. And for each of these 5 lead markets, what the strategy contains and what the Commission will do in the next year is to try to support regulatory simplification, creation of demand, and mobilize investment and support investments. Other key enablers in this field will be, of course, the revision of public procurement regulations, trying to increase and promote the purchase by public administrations of bio-based solutions, the creation of a bio-based European alliance, which has been announced by the Commission this week publicly, which is a voluntary corporate alliance with companies which commit to purchase 10 billion euros of bio-based products by 2030, thus creating a demand for bio-based innovative solutions, and the creation of a competitiveness coordination tool, which will serve as an accelerator of the industrial readiness of bio-based prototypes and products. Not only lead markets for materials, but also lead markets for technologies are needed, and the Commission focuses on biorefineries, on advanced fermentation and permanent storage of biogenic carbon. And as enablers, of course, the Commission and the European Investment Bank Group, of course, will continue making available blended finance instruments, as well as in order to mobilize investments at regional level also. The Commission intends to facilitate industrial symbiosis valleys, which will serve as an aggregator of feedstocks, infrastructure, and investment planning at regional territorial level. Access for SMEs and scale-ups to funding and pilot and demonstration infrastructure will be as well supported, and the Innovation Fund will also support the scalability of projects and investments. Pillar 3 is related to providing and securing sustainably sourced biomass to the bio-based industry and the circular bioeconomy. On one side, by reducing the need for primary biomass, and so reinforcing the European regulations, for instance, in the field of eco-design for sustainable product regulations that increase longevity, reusability, and recyclability of products. So products, when they are designed taking already at this stage in mind the fact that their components can have a second life at the end of the product. The Commission will also support bio-waste collection and valorization with, in particular, the upcoming Circular Economy Act, which is expected later on, the production of biogas and biomethane, and the use of digestate as a bio-based fertilizer through a tripartite agreement. It will also work on the promotion of nitrogen efficiency in the economic systems, in particular through Renew initiative. The Commission will also foster knowledge exchange and data acquisition and sharing in order to understand how much biomass can be produced and extracted, while at the same time protecting ecosystems and maintaining a resilient land sector carbon sink. And this will be done thanks to the Knowledge Center for Bioeconomy, thanks to risks analysis of biomass supply chains, the use of data gathered by Copernicus monitoring system, as well as trying to promote consensus through voluntary and bottom-up approaches and exchanges with producers, processors, and the bio-based industry in order to have fresher outputs on supply outlooks for the future. Of course, all the main feedstocks, which are forest-based, agriculture-based, aquatic biomass, will need to be explored in order to have an updated outlook on what the expectations in terms of supply of biomass will be for the future. And water resilience will also need to be taken into consideration horizontally. And we are reaching the end of the presentation. Pillar 4, the last one, is harnessing global partnership and opportunities. And so Europe should not only look internally, but also facilitate for bio-based industry a wider access to global markets and partner with European alliances and key partners. And the enablers to reach this objective will be facilitating access to global markets, and so boosting exports of bio-based technologies and trying to support a diversification of biomass sources, being a very active player in the framework of international fora which discuss sustainability agendas and circular economy, and the reinforcing of strategic partnerships and regional cooperation. For instance, cooperating with Africa, with BioEast, and so the Eastern companies, Eastern countries, and the partner countries, which are key partners of Europe as a continent. To sum up, the rules of the game have shifted toward companies capable of converting biological resources into high-value materials, and the early movers will capture the greatest value. Thank you for your attention. Here you can find the contact details of myself and my colleague Francesco Coletti, and we will, if you have any questions or if you want to dive deeper into this issue, we are available to provide you support with our support.
Many thanks for your presentation, Laura. That was really very, very interesting. In the interest of time, we shall move on now to Eva, who will give us the perception from Sweden with regards to the forestry regulations and the impact that it's had on a more local level within Sweden itself. Yeah, we can see your slides. Great. Thank you, Eva.
So I'll just have to do this once more.
That looks great.
So now everything is great. Yeah, thank you very much. This part of the webinar will be a bit different than the previous parts. I will dig into what happens when regulatory frameworks are to be implemented in a specific country for a specific part of the bioeconomy, in this case, the forestry. So what happens when a country's realities and ideologies intercept? There has been quite a lot of discussion regarding forest management and forests, and I will try to give you one glance at this. Me myself is a forester, been working with the development of new market fields for forest for quite some time. I'm also a forest owner, so I'll try to give you a perspective from both the academic and practical or human side of this. So before starting about regulations, talking about regulations can be very abstract and bureaucratic. But for me, this is what the regulation affects. So with rotation times in forestry in Sweden of more than 100 years, sometimes up to 130, 140 years, forests in Sweden are mostly used for hunting, berries and mushroom picking, and recreation. And all the phases in forest management are important. Raspberries and lingonberries are found some years after clear cuts. Clear cuts provide the moose with fodder and make good places for hunting towers. Middle-aged forest and old forest are very good for mushrooms and blueberries. And what I do in my forest will not benefit me, but perhaps my daughter's children, since the rotation time is so long. So most of the time, the forests are for other stuff than cutting the timber. With that said, I will give you an introduction to forestry in Sweden shortly. I will dive into some regulations with the main focus on environment and climate issues that has impacted quite severely forestry in Sweden, and give some new focus on resilience and competitiveness that has been touched upon already by both Gail and Ilaria. But talking about forests in Sweden, well, we are a forested country. 70% almost is covered by forests. Out of the 27.9 million hectares of forest land, 19.4 hectares are available for wood supply, according to international standards, FAO. So 30% is not available right now. My county, situated in the very northern parts of Sweden, is twice the size of Belgium. We have 1% arable land, so what we have is forest, very little agricultural activities. The forest is owned primarily by private owners, almost 50%. Other owners consist of the church or different churches, foundations and stuff like that. And then we have private companies owning approximately 23%. And it might interest you to know that individuals are female and men. So in Sweden, we have more female forest owners than we have female nurses. So everything affecting forestry also affects entrepreneurship among women, of course, and men. The commercial species we are dealing with are pine and spruce. We have some other commercial species in the south, like beech and oak, but these are really dominating. And even though those are the things or the species we plant after a clear cut, we always have a lot of other indigenous species naturally regenerating in the stand. So a stand is almost never out of one species. We have birch, alder, rowan, willow, and other species in those stands. And as you see in the north, the normal rotation age is up to 130 years. And in the southern parts of Sweden is approximately 100 years. Another thing to mention is that we have what is called the All Man's Right Act in Sweden. So everyone is allowed to be in the forest. We have no fences. Everyone can pick as much berries and mushrooms as they want. This does not apply for hunting. That's another thing, but everyone can be there. So talking to people, they claim that they talk about the forest like it's their forest, but it's actually the forest owners who have all the responsibilities to follow all the regulations, and people not owning forest just have the rights to be there and enjoy what the forest can provide. So with that said, we have a long history of using the forest. It was first used, of course, for ships and mining industry and tar production and stuff like that. But the demand from Europe during the 17th century really resulted in the first big cuts. So it came and started in the southwest of Sweden, and those dimensional fellings continued through the country up to the north, and it reached the northern part in the late 1800s. These dimensional fellings came in 2 and 3 waves, so a lot of the timber we had back then, before we started really managing the forests, went into Europe to fulfill the demand from that area. Sawmills and pulp industry grew in parallel in the second half of the 17th century and eventually transformed Sweden from a very poor agricultural country to a modern industrial nation. But in the beginning of 1900, the politicians started wondering, will we have enough timber to supply our pulp and sawmill industry? So in 1923, the first national inventory was carried out. And with the starting numbers from 1923, this is the accumulated biomass that has been produced in Sweden. So we've used approximately 6.3 billion cubic meters in our industry to transform Sweden from the poor agricultural country to what we are right now. We've also added growth, approximately 9 billion cubic meters still standing. And of course, you have mortality in forest. That's an ongoing process. But this shows that using forest and building up a carbon sink is not something that can't be done in parallel. We have done that. And showing this in another way is this. When we started this first national forest inventory, we had a storage or a stock of approximately 1.8 million cubic meters in the Swedish forests. Then we've used biomass, and now we have approximately 3,600 million cubic meters. So we've more than doubled the stock, even though we've used so much as 6 billion cubic meters in the industry. This is partly or mainly because we have had a very active forest management system going on and being developed during these 150 years. So, of course, it is steered by regulations. So when the politicians were worried about will the timber be enough in the beginning of 1900s, Sweden passed the first modern forestry act, and the revolutionary principle in that one was that everyone need to replant when forests are harvested or cut. In 1993, 90 years later, a new forestry act took effect, and that was after all this very intense industrialized period of forest industry. Agriculture had the same development, going from horse and animals doing quite a lot of the stuff into the technical part with machines and tractors and everything. The same happened in forest, and it was too focused on production. So in 1993, the law placed production and environmental goals as equals. and established for forest owners the principle of freedom with responsibilities. So we are supposed to adapt our management based on soil conditions and conservation values. And then we entered the EU in 1995, and the forests was a national competence. And that meant that Sweden retained sole legal authority over their own forest policies and day-to-day management. But then the EU regulations came along, and as we've heard, the European Green Deal, for example. Forests were not in the treaty, but due to environmental and climate issues, this related in forest strategy, the biodiversity strategy, the Fit for 55, the deforestation regulation, restoration directive, and so on. And during this period, Swedish forestry were heavily debated and criticized, and quite a lot of mistrust of our official data was displaced as well. So why was this, and what happened in Sweden when this, it turned out that the forest came into the regulations for EU and no longer were this national competence? Well, one thing that hit quite hard is the land use and land use change and forestry regulation. That regulation sets targets for increasing carbon removals from land and forests, and it's yearly uptakes we are talking about. The overall EU goal is 310 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. Sweden's share of that is 48.8 or 16%. So a very large share of the EU total goal falls to Sweden. The total amount of carbon stored in Swedish forest is about 13 billion tons of carbon dioxide, 2/3 in the ground and 1/3 in the trees. So that's not what we are talking about, what we already do. This is what we are supposed to do in addition to that. In 2024, Sweden reported 55 million tons of carbon dioxide and was the only country to actually report a net negative balance between emissions and sink. But this will be very hard to achieve in the future, and highly, or the reason for that is that this is a biological resource and it's dependent on weather. So it will be hard, and to get a short-term solution, it's been discussed to set aside 1 to 2 million hectares of forest land just to store. But the problem with just storing is that trees and forests are like people. Babies and elderly people are not very productive. Middle-aged people are. And young forests and old forests is the same, not very productive, but middle-aged forests are. So this will just help for a couple of years. In a 100 years lifespan, it's not the best way. And we count in hundreds of years since forests are slow business. What we do, we cut, of course, but only 1% is clear cut yearly out of those 19.4 million hectares available for wood supply. 1% is cut. About 300,000 hectares are thinned as well. And thinning is like when you grow carrots, you remove some plants in order to get big carrots and not just small ones. We do that in forestry as well. So while 1% is cut, the remaining 99% continue to absorb carbon dioxide. One clash with the LULUCF is that we are supposed to maximize the storage inside the forest and soil. But then, because of the LULUCF counts, the net volume of trees left standing, harvesting a tree to become a bio-based plastic or textiles or what have you, registers as an emission. But the fossil emission savings achieved downstreams end up in the credited industrial or construction sectors, not the forestry sectors. That's something we sometimes see as a problem. Another directive that affects forestry is the Deforestation Directive that replaces the EU timber regulation. And this regulation concerns commodities like cattle, wood, cocoa, soy, palm oil, coffee, rubber, and some of their derived products. It contains primarily 4 areas. It's the traceability area that makes it hard for forestry. It will contain a strict tracing and geolocation system and a central European information system. It talks about deforestation-free wood and no forest degradation. The due diligence has partly made it hard to get in finance in forest business in Sweden, since it's been so fuzzy what this forest degradation really means. So this has been a problem for people wanting to invest in forest land. First of all, we have no deforestation in the EU according to Forest Europe. That's one thing. So this is mainly a regulation that should prevent us from buying wood from countries that actually do have deforestation, because of course deforestation exists, but not really in the EU. The forest degradation part means that in order to be able to sell or put wood on the European market, we must not convert primary forest into plantation forests. And primary forests are defined as naturally regenerated forest of native tree species, where there are no clearly visible indications of human activities. You can imagine that a forest being 140 years old is quite hard to see whether there's been human activities in it or not. So some of these definitions are up to subjective judgments, and that poses an insecurity or fuzziness in how to do this. Yeah. The most apparent problem when it comes to this deforestation directive is the cost for the administrative system that must be built around the traceability and mapping. If you imagine a car factory, components come into the car factory, you put the car together and out it goes. When it comes to forestry, you bring a log or a tree to a sawmill or a pulp mill, and then you get the boards or the pulp, you get shavings, you get sawdust, you get bark and things like that end up in a pile, and every single sawdust must be mapped. And so it poses some complexity to meet these requirements. That's why probably that this regulation has been postponed several times. It's now planned to be come into effective in December this year for large companies, and for smaller companies in June next year. The Renewable Energy Directive is another directive that when the negotiations went on in the trilogues during the pre-phase of this, Sawdust was not seen as a renewable, or forest residues primarily, wasn't seen as a renewable raw material. The share of renewable energy today is 25% approximately in the Europe, and bioenergy is 60% of that. So bioenergy is really the European Union's largest renewable energy source, well ahead of wind and power still. But when it comes to the sawdust and the forest residues, it was stated that we are not supposed to use or cut the trees to use them for energy. But the logic in Sweden is that we cut a tree because we earn most money on the saw logs. But when we cut a tree, we get forest residues, the tops and branches as well. We get pulpwood or thinner dimensions suitable for pulpwood. And when we do make the saw logs or debark the pulpwood in order to make pulp, we get bark and sawdust and stuff like that. And we've used that to replace fossil oil in our heating system in Sweden. So the whole of Sweden is heated by CHP plants, combined heat and power plants, heated with residues, mainly coming from forest operations. And when the cascading principles is included in the Renewable Energy Directive, it's very hard because you need to use these side streams from forest operations close by because it's extremely expensive to transport. So if there is not a CHP plant close by, it won't be harvested. The Nature Restoration Directive, the last directive I will mention, sets binding targets to restore at least 20% of the European land and sea areas by 2030, and to restore all ecosystems in need by 2050. And this regulation significantly poses friction and gives friction and structural implications for both forestry and agriculture, of course. In Sweden, it's estimated the costs for this is estimated to be 395 million euros annually, and that's doubling the state's current cost for formal protection of forests. And the main part of the financial bit is to compensate private forest
Okay, we seem to have just lost Eva. I'll just give her a couple of minutes and see if she's able to rejoin. Just a quick reminder whilst we're waiting for her to join back in, is that if anyone's got any questions, just to pop them into the chat function, and we will come back to them in a little while.
Sorry, it was too boring, so I was kicked out.
No, it's okay.
No? No? Okay, I'll try to resume. Let's see. So, are we back?
Yes, we've got you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was saying that most part of the money estimated for the Nature Restoration Directive will be converted or will go to forest owners when their land is converted into nature reserves or protected through biotope protection agreements. And all the societal costs that comes with this closed factories and sawmills and so on is not included in that. And it's estimated that this will affect 250,000 hectares of forest until 2030 and an additional 1.5 million hectares until 2050. Okay, that was the part of the regulation that has been focusing on environment and climate issues. But then the Draghi report came and the war in Ukraine hit and are still going on. And some new ideas like Ilaria has presented has come up as well. And the Draghi report said that accelerated innovation, lower energy prices, and enhanced strategic autonomy and security are the three key drivers for boosting competitiveness in the EU. And as Ilaria said, the bioeconomy promotes substituting fossil resources with wood-based alternatives, and the biocircular economy is on the rise, like it seems. So there is some sort of fundamental conflict between the bioeconomy perspective versus the carbon sink perspective from our perspective. Looking at forest from this perspective, wood-based value chains equals 7% of EU's overall manufacturing GDP. It becomes a quite important sector when we are talking about accelerating innovation. So I guess we will have a continued discussion regarding the regulations and how to balance this. My reflections and comments, the last slide, is that instead of an equal goal for protection and environment, like we had in Sweden or something similar, there has been a division between biodiversity and environment on one hand, and climate neutrality and bioeconomy and bio-innovation and stuff like that on the other hand. One problem we see is that the first package of regulation were set out and are now being implemented without a serious impact assessment for the societal effects they bring on member countries with a lot of forests, a lot of forest owners and a developed forest industry. And there are many forest owners within the European Union. Sweden has not the most forest owners, but we have a lot. And there is a rising internal and global demand for biomass. How can we tackle that? I am extremely curious how this will turn out in the future. And forests and forestry mean very different things in the European Union. I hope we will come to see the benefits of managing and using them in a more nuanced way in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Eva. That was really interesting, really interesting, and quite a strong reminder that when you've got regulations that span a whole continent, that the individual reaction towards them in specific countries can be quite different and quite marked impact. So just moving on to our final presenter, last but not least, we have Bart, who will talk to us about the navigatable route from R&D in agri-food and towards regulatory approval. Last but not least, Bart, but I hand over to you.
Yes, thank you, Gail. Everybody can see my slides in the good presentation mode?
Yes, you're all good.
Okay, thank you. There we go. So for this last part of our regulatory webinar, we will switch focus again. So I will introduce you to regulations in relation to microbial fermentation. So something completely different, but highly relevant as well. So let me start by highlighting that in the recent years, we can see a clear increase in the introduction of microorganisms in the agri-food chain. And one of the reasons clearly is that we are now able to produce these at a very competitive way, so they can compete with other food production methods. And there's also momentum in the framework of the protein shift, as we are looking to diversify our protein consumption and look into new protein sources. So besides that, we clearly see that companies specialized in fermentation are increasing, and that the number of these kind of companies in Europe is actually quite high compared to other continents or other countries, for example, Canada and the US, as you can see on the table in the right. So the general expectation is that microorganisms will be increasingly introduced into our foods in the future, and they will become a substantial part of it in the near future. Now, some examples on this slide. We have different kind of fermentations, and we have to make the discrimination between biomass fermentation, where we use the entire biomass of the microorganisms, versus precision fermentation, where we use microorganisms to produce a specific protein or any other compound. And some examples are given here. For example, we can produce steviol by using yeast. Steviol is a sweetener with a very high intensity of sweetness that can replace sugar, but has a low caloric contribution in our diet. So that's an interesting molecule. There are other examples of, for example, human milk proteins produced by Escherichia coli, to use these in milk powders for infants, for example. And we're also capable already of producing animal fats with a healthier human fatty acid profile. So these are some examples to illustrate the relevance of this sector. Now, when zooming in on legislation, of course, there are a lot of food safety laws, and the one and the most important one is the General Food Safety Law mentioned on top of the slide. It's an overarching general food safety law which is applicable on all foods and feeds on the market, and this states that all food and feed on the market, of course, has to be safe, and that this safety falls under the responsibility of the producer, and actually this also applies to pet food. And we see a clearly trend of a humanization of our pets. We consider them as our child, so they should be protected by the same regulations. This regulation also states that all decisions related to safety must be based on a risk analysis, and that the basic principles set out by EFSA are of course to be followed. When we look into broader regulations that apply to food and feed, and also to microbial protein produced in this way, then we see that there are a lot of other regulations. For example, there's one on hygiene, there's one on the official control that should be organized by the member states, and there's also one for feed and for pet food, as I just mentioned. So on top of these general food safety laws, there are of course many other specific regulations for particular food and feed applications, and in these specific regulations, an EFSA role is clearly very important, and you need it to be able to enter the market. Now, on the following slide, you see a general scheme that can be used to guide applicants throughout the entire process. And if we start from the top, for example, if you look into microorganisms, the first question you have to ask yourself, will the product produced be EU regulated product or not? And if the answer is no, then this means that checking the general food safety is okay, and that can be done by the member states. But if there are European regulations in place that apply to your product, EFSA safety assessment has to be done. And then for every typical application field, there are specific regulations to be followed and assessments to be done. So depending on the EFSA area, different applicable EU legislation is in place, and these safety assessment procedures are somewhat different, but they all have to be followed. And they are listed here as an example to give you some ideas already. So it's clear that, as we all know, that this legislative framework is quite complex. There are legislations which ask for assessments of efficacy and safety. Think about, for example, probiotics as feed additives, but there are many other products that can be produced using microbial fermentation. Others are only requesting efficacy, for example, in relation to health claims. And there are also categories where only safety is considered in regulation when we look, for example, into the novel food regulation. Probiotics and starter cultures used in feed should also undergo an FSA assessment. And probiotics and starter cultures for humans not. So sometimes it's not really logical, but in this last example, if GMMs, so genetically modified microorganisms, are used or novel food is in place, then again specific regulations apply. When we look into biomass, that results in single cell proteins, so we use the biomass for the proteins and we want to apply them in animal feed, no FSA assessment is needed. However, for human food, this falls under the novel food legislation and will require an FSA assessment. Another product of bio-based applications, the biostimulants for plants, they don't require a risk assessment. So to summarize this slide, I would say that the legislative framework is quite complex and not always logic. So you need some guidance in order to be able to follow the regulatory path in a correct way. Now, before diving into some examples, a bit of explanation on how the use of microorganisms is evaluated in Europe by EFSA. And in a bit more detail, actually, they set up this microorganisms pipeline service. What is this? Actually, this is an EFSA-developed bioinformatics platform that uses genetic information. So we can sequence the DNA in every microorganism by using technologies such as whole genome sequencing. And these technologies then reveal the genome. So every single base in the DNA is revealed. And this information is used to assess the safety. This is applicable to bacteria, fungi, and viruses. And actually, the functionality of this platform is an automated and harmonized data processing pipeline to check the quality of the data, to check the genome assembly, how the genome is put together, to identify the microbial strain, even go very deep in the typing of the strain, because there's a big diversity in microbes, of course. And we look into particular characteristics such as antibiotic resistance and virulence factors and so on. So it is clear that this process has a very high regulatory value because it allows the member states to follow the applicants from the different member states to follow the same procedure. So it's harmonizing how we should look at this assessment, and clearly it supports at the EU level the risk assessment and the data sharing regarding the use of microorganisms. So this platform contributes to the regulatory decision making and the risk assessment regarding the use of microorganisms. So this is as an intro. Now, I will guide you through 3 specific examples where we had to deal with different regulatory paths. And the first one is the case of Cupriavidis necator. So we used these microorganisms in a project together with Biobase Europe pilot plant, and the microorganism was used to produce polyhydroxybutyrate. And that is actually a building block for a biodegradable polymer that can be used in packaging and other devices. So we used in this test, in this project, the microorganism to produce single cell protein as well, so a protein source, and we wanted to evaluate that protein for food applications. The residual biomass of the polyhydroxybutyrate production was evaluated for feed applications. And this slide summarizes actually how it was produced and how it was harvested and concentrated and stabilized during this project. Now, to look at the regulatory applications that need to be fulfilled to evaluate the different uses, this slide is actually summarizing. So we worked with a specific strain of Cupriavidis necator. So we had to collect information on its genome, and we wanted to use this in a biomass fermentation process to produce 2 different products, the polyhydroxybutyrate and also the single cell protein. So that is actually already clearing out some attention points. It's a non-GMO strain, and this organism is categorized as a qualified presumption of safe. That means that we can use this bacteria for for a safe production, it was granted this status by EFSA. So that means that we can use it for food and feed. So this implies that a single cell protein for food application will require an EFSA statement, EFSA assessment, sorry, but it's falling under the novel food regulation. And the residual biomass obtained through biomass fermentation, that is a non-GMO for feed application, so that doesn't require an EFSA assessment. So you see that it's quite complex. We produce different products, and depending on the application field, we have to follow different regulations. A second example is quite similar, actually. Here we used Piscia pastoris, also in the framework of a collaboration with Biobase Europe pilot plant, and it was used to produce an enzyme, rhamnosidase, and this enzyme, for example, is used in clarification of fruit juices. The spent biomass was further assessed and processed to be evaluated for food and feed applications, and the slide again summarizes the process scheme. Now, looking into the summary towards regulatory paths, we used Piscia as a microorganism for precision fermentation. It was a GM stream, so other regulations applied. It had the QPS status, so it was already presumed as safe by EFSA. And for the enzyme for food application, this implies an EFSA assessment according to regulation 1331, because we need that assessment for application in food. In this case, for food application, DNA and germs need to be absent in the final enzyme preparation, and that, of course, has to be demonstrated. In the residual biomass for food and feed applications, DNA is still in it, so GM food and feed assessment is necessary. This is depicted here. And normally, biomass for feed doesn't need to pass through the EFSA unless GMOs are used and DNA is still present. So that was the case in this study. So that means that GMO feed regulation is also in place and had to be followed. And that brings me to my third example, another example where we used Yarovia lipolytica to produce fats. So in the first two examples, we were focusing on protein and on enzymes, but in this case, we collaborated with a lot of partners listed at the bottom of the slide to produce fats using microbial fermentation. And those fats can be used for different applications, such as pet food and food applications. So again, this slide summarizes the process that was followed. And then when we look into the regulatory paths that are applicable, again, a GMO was used, so this has to be taken into account. And we performed the precision fermentation. For the application in food, because it's GMO, we need to take into account that DNA was removed during the downstream processing, so no EFSA assessment following the GMO food regulation is required. So that's why this is put in brackets in this frame. And when we look at the lipids, pet food follows the feed assessment according to EFSA, and thereby an assessment following the feed additive regulation is applicable as it concerns no biomass. So no GMO feed assessment is required for the same reasons as for the food application, as the DNA is removed during the downstream processing. But again, of course, the applicants have to demonstrate that in their dossier when they apply for it. So these were three examples, and in some cases, novel food was mentioned. So that's why I also put in a slide to clarify a bit how we should look at the novel food regulation. And actually, what is novel food? Well, that is every food or ingredient that has not been used for human consumption to a significant degree before a specified date, and that date is 15 May 1997. So it is very clear. It means that if what you produced was not present in the European diet before 1997, it is recognized as safe. It is normal food, or a food supplement, and it cannot contain food additives. So this novel food regulation is quite clear, but when you look, for example, at the definition, we encountered some dossiers where a new technology was applied, for example, to produce fruit juice. And if the composition of the fruit juice of this new technology, which was introduced into Europe after this date of 15 May 1997, if this technology leads to a different composition of the fruit juice, this could potentially be classified as novel food. So it's also quite complex, and that's why it's very important for every applicant who is doubting about the novel food status to get in touch quickly with this novel food specialist in its member states and to verify the potential classification as novel food or not, because it's not that simple. If you want to check the novel food status of a certain product, you can do that by looking at the European Novel Food Status Catalog. The links are listed here on the slides, and also the conditions of use and specifications of authorized novel foods is clearly described in the European Union, also in a list that can be checked online, and the links are included in this presentation. So if your product falls within the use and specifications on already authorized novel foods, then of course this authorization is also valid for your product. So if you produce a similar product that already has been assessed as novel food and it passed the application, then this is of course also valid for you, and you don't have to repeat it, luckily. Now, to summarize a little bit how the novel food authorization process is going, this slide was included. So you see that it starts with carrying out a risk assessment by EFSA, and that takes a quite long period, around 9 months. So that's the third block, the third green point in the timeline. However, when talking to people who applied and to people from EFSA, 80% of the dossiers can take up to 20 months. So this regulatory evaluation for novel food can take quite some time. And of course, the quality of the dossier and all the information you are expected to deliver has to be high, it has to be clear. The better you prepare the dossier, the faster the run-through time. But of course, it's not always obvious if you do this for the first time, and that's the reason why 80% of the dossiers takes a bit longer than this 9 months, which is in this timeline. I also included a link for anybody who would like to find out more info about the novel food authorization pathway. And that actually brings me to my last slides. So when we look at risk assessment in general for food and specifically for microbial fermentation, it's very important to understand that characterization of the strain and the microbe you are using is a starting point, but there are many other aspects that need to be tackled. Toxicological assessment, allergenicity, the purity of your product depending on the application. And yeah, especially for food ingredients, nutritional assessment is highly relevant. That's very logical. And when looking into microorganisms and the derived products, it's also very important to pay attention to the presence of viable organisms and/or DNA in the final products. Because if genetically modified microorganisms are still present, of course, additional regulations come into place, as I've illustrated in the use cases, and environmental risk assessment, considering the potential horizontal DNA transfer then needs to be evaluated, and that complicates the story, of course. So this brings me to the concluding remarks and actually to a take-home message regarding microbial fermentation. It's very important, as was mentioned in the other stories, that when you start developing a product and a process, you think about the final risk assessment that will apply on your product. The sooner you are aware of this, the smoother the process might go. It's for sure a recommendation to take regulatory aspects into account as early as possible to make wise choices about the organism you are going to use, the production process you're going to follow, etc. So there's some detailed information mentioning that the taxonomic position of the microbe is important because as I explained, some virulence factors, antimicrobial resistance might be linked to the microorganisms you plan to use, so that might complicate the stories further. It's a lengthy process, so collecting all the information for a pre-submission phase, you should be attentive to that and take enough time and reserve money in the company to realize that. As I explained, there is a nice portal at the EFSA website that helps you to collect all the genetic information from the whole genome sequencing efforts you have to realize. So this pipeline is really nicely prepared by EFSA, but of course you need to provide the relevant info. Of course, the one but last bullet, the QPS list, so the list with the organisms that can be used should be checked at the beginning. And as I already mentioned, the antimicrobial resistance genes and other genes, virulence genes, that might lead to safety or health issues. Of course, this needs to be checked carefully as soon as you start thinking about producing products using microbial fermentation. So with this, I would like to stop. It's a complex matter, but hopefully I brought some clarity in this topic. And if you would have any questions on this, my colleague Geert and myself are available for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart, for a really interesting discussion. Novel foods is something that comes up quite frequently within projects that we're talking about through To Be Real, and it's good to know that there's a process that is being followed, and it does seem to be reasonably well harmonised across the EU as well. So we are at the end of our webinar. I'm aware that we've had a lot of information presented this morning, so I just want to open up the floor to if anybody has any questions. We don't have any questions within the chat function, but if anybody has any questions that they want to ask the presenters, now is your time whilst they are here as a captive audience. You can also email us if you think about things afterwards. Email the To Be Real email address, and that will be passed on. But I just thought that at this particular point, whether there was any questions from the chairs, from the floor, or from the presenters themselves to each other. All you need to do is raise your hand. Anybody? In that case, I won't stand in between you and a much needed lunch break. Thank you very much for attending. As I mentioned at the beginning, the recording will be available, so if people want to pop back and revisit anything that our presenters have said, and as I said as well, we are also open to more questions, and you might, even if you want to apply for a To Be Real support that Maria mentioned at the front as well. So with that, I'll say goodbye from the UK and wish you all a very good weekend.
Goodbye.
Thank
See
you.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining.
Have a great day. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.